perfect.
Yes, excellent. Oh, but first I gotta do a few errands.
Let's be honest guys, Mewtwo EX was a big forehead-ass problem in Pocket. If you couldn't beat it in the early game, it was almost guaranteed to win. Even the decks that could beat Mewtwo would get a circuit up their ass and booted home. You either hard counter Mewtwo and have Pikachu sending you packing, or you hard counter Pikachu but Mewtwo smacks you up. Unless you're a Giga Chad Charcanine player of course. But now that Mythical Island has given us a lot more powerful cards and made the meta a lot more diverse, Mewtwo players can't just turn their brain off and get free wins anymore. If you want to win with this deck, you're really gonna know what you're doing, or you'll get your ginormous forehead handed to you. Mews, Artigons, Celebes, Golems, and Gyarados. If you are new to the game, or to this deck in general, I ain't gonna keep you in the dark. I'll have a little section here on how this deck's game plan works and what you're aiming for. Mewtwo EX is a basic Pokemon with 150 HP and 2 attacks. Psychic Sphere takes 2 energy and does 50 damage, and Side Drive takes 4 energy and does 150 damage, but will also detach 2 psychic energy when you use it. 150 damage is super strong in this game because it can KO almost any Pokemon in just one hit. The relevant Pokemon right now that everyone has to have a way to kill are Celebi EX, which has 130, Mew EX, which has 130, Arcanine EX, which has 150, the legendary birds all have 140 or 130, Pikachu EX has 120, Marowak and Aerodactyl EX have 140, and almost every non-EX Pokemon in the game has 150 or less HP too. So taking your time to build this up, that near guarantee to knock something out is a really worthwhile investment. That said, even though it is worthwhile, taking 4 turns to get there gives the opponent a long time to prepare for your onslaught, and maybe even kill your Mewtwo if they can get enough damage going across the first few turns. Mewtwo himself having 150 HP means that he's also surviving a lot of hits in the early game. The best generic early attacker in the game is Farfetch'd. It only does 40 damage, so it'll take him 4 attacks to take out a Mewtwo. But since Mewtwo has Psychic Sphere to attack before setting up the side drive, it can fight back early on too. Even so, there are cards that can put enough pressure onto the Mewtwo that even if it does get to knock out an opponent's Pokemon, the next Pokemon they switch in could knock out the Mewtwo in return. And even if you have another Mewtwo to bring forward, you're gonna have to start your energy climb again while the opponents are likely already set up to lay the smackdown on him. Even if the Mewtwo survives, we still have to wait to build up his energy again before he can start knocking things out again. Every problem I just talked about is fixed by Gardevoir. He's a stage 2 Pokemon with a special ability to give a bonus psychic energy to a psychic Pokemon in your active spot. Since Gardevoir is a stage 2, you'll need to put down Routes on one turn, Kirlia on another, and then Gardevoir on the third. Taking a minimum of 3 turns to set up, this is still faster than the 4 turns of energy that Mewtwo would normally need to set up. If we go first, then we can set Routes on Mewtwo with no energy since we are going first. Then on our second turn we can play Kirlia and put an energy on Mewtwo. And on our third turn we can play Gardevoir, put a second energy on Mewtwo, and have the Gardevoir put the third energy on Mewtwo. And Mewtwo can attack for 50. On our fourth turn we can have Gardevoir put a 4th energy on Mewtwo, and our normal energy for the turn can be spent to start building up another Pokemon on our bench. Without the Gardevoir there, we would have to wait a whole other turn, which could make all the difference. If we go second though, we can start our first turn playing Mewtwo and Routes, putting an energy on Mewtwo. On our second turn we can play Kirlia and put a second energy on Mewtwo and attack with it. Then on our third turn we can play Gardevoir and it'll give Mewtwo an energy, and we can use our turn's energy to give Mewtwo its 4th, and we can attack for 150. The benefit of Gardevoir to build up the Mewtwo is only the start of it, because the 2 energy that Mewtwo discards to attack with, next turn Gardevoir can set him right back up to full power to attack with Side Drive again. Every single turn, the Gardevoir plus the regular energy for turn will give Mewtwo 2 fresh energy, and that maintenance will keep Mewtwo fully powered as long as he stays alive. If the first Mewtwo dies and you have another one too, then Gardevoir with a regular energy per turn will allow the new Mewtwo to attack for 50 right away as well. It will only take 2 turns to set up the new Mewtwo instead of the 3 or 4 it would have taken the first Mewtwo. This is the general idea for how the Mewtwo deck wants to play. Build up Mewtwo with the help of Gardevoir and maintain its power with Gardevoir to sweep whatever the opponent throws your way. If you want to get your game plan going, you'll need the Mewtwo EX himself, and you'll also need to find routes, Kirlia, and Gardevoir. If you can get the Gardevoir line, but you can't get the Mewtwo, then you can at least buy some amount of time with a Gardevoir, and when you finally find the Mewtwo, you can tag out into it with X speeds or a leaf, lowering the retreat cost to get the Mewtwo out. It's important to get a free retreat so that the Gardevoir can give Mewtwo a bonus energy alongside the turn's energy so he can attack right away. Then attack with Side Drive on the next turn. If you have Kirlia in the active spot and can evolve it into Gardevoir the same turn you play Mewtwo, you should retreat the Kirlia before evolving it, since it only has a 1 energy retreat cost, so it can be done with an X speed, while Gardevoir has a retreat cost of 2, meaning that it'll need 2 X speeds or a leaf or an X speed alongside an energy. All of these ways are obviously harder than just retreating the Kirlia first. If you can find Mewtwo but are unable to start your routes line, it's gonna be a rough situation for you, because Mewtwo EX is a way worse card without ways to build him up faster. If you have any other Pokemon though, you could have them in the active spot soaking up damage for you, so you can build up your Mewtwo safely in the bench to come out when it's ready to start smacking. In both of these scenarios, you do have these avenues you can use to keep you in the game, but you're gonna feel like a far worse deck than when your Mewtwo and Gardevoir are on the scene quickly. Thankfully, we do have some pretty good consistency cards in the game to help us out with this. Pokeball is a card any deck can use to randomly add a basic Pokemon from deck to hand. This could give us Mewtwo, and it could give us routes. These are the two most important to find, because without Mewtwo we aren't attacking, and without routes our Kirlias and Gardevoirs are useless in our hand. Professor's Research draws 2 cards, digging into our deck to help us draw into the Pokemon we need, and if we don't draw them with this, then we are at least getting closer and closer to finding them. Mythical Slab looks at the top card of our deck, and if it's a Psychic type Pokemon, we can add it to our hand, but if it isn't, then we can put it at the bottom of our deck. All of these are ways we can sift through our deck to get access to the Pokemon we need so much to get our plays going, but you shouldn't just throw them around randomly. There is a right way and a wrong way to use these cards depending on the situation. First of all, I'll talk about Pokeball and Professor's Research, since every deck uses these. If you have them both, which should you use first? Well, it really depends on what we have available to us already and what is left in our deck. Let's say what we need is a specific basic Pokemon. Maybe we already have a Mewtwo, but we need routes, for example. In our deck, we have 2 copies of routes, but also a copy of Mewtwo. If we use Pokeball in this situation, we have a 2 out of 3 chance of getting the routes we need. But we could use Professor's Research first, and there will be a chance for the research to draw into one of our 3 basics. If it draws our Mewtwo, then our Pokeball has a 100% chance of giving us routes, and if the research draws routes, then it doesn't matter anymore what the Pokeball gives us, because we will have what we need. So if you need a specific basic Pokemon, research first, then Pokeball. But what if we already have the basics we need, but we need a specific card like Kirlia, Gardevoir, or a certain trainer card? Well, let's say in this case we also have 3 basic Pokemon in our deck. If we use research, it has a chance to draw into those basic Pokemon. We don't need basics though, so those may be dead draws. If we use Pokeball first in this situation, we are going to have less basic Pokemon in our deck overall, meaning that our research is less likely to draw into basics and therefore more likely to draw us into what we need. So if you need a specific card that isn't a basic Pokemon, Pokeball first and then research. We get an added layer of complexity to the situation when we add Mythical Slab into the mix. It's pretty simple if we have Slab and research together though. Let's say we have 5 psychic Pokemon left in our deck. If we use research first, but it draws no psychic Pokemon, it means that the Slab is statistically more likely to hit a psychic when you use it. The research draws 1 psychic Pokemon and 1 non-psychic card. The Slab won't be any more or less helpful than before statistically. If the research draws 2 psychic Pokemon, the Slab will be statistically worse than if you were to use it first. These 3 different scenarios where Slab is either better, worse, or even are kind of unpredictable. Let's say instead we use the Slab first. We use it, and if it's a psychic Pokemon, then great, we can add it to our hand. If it isn't though, then it goes to the bottom of the deck, and that's actually still a benefit if you're looking for psychic Pokemon, because that 1 card you put on the bottom of your deck is 1 card you can be certain the research isn't going to draw into, and you've essentially made every other card in your deck more likely to be drawn into. If the Slab does hit and give you a psychic to the hand, then that's still making the rest of the cards in your deck more likely to be drawn because there are less cards in the deck to be drawn. You could roll the dice by using research first, you will be more consistent by using slab and then research. If you have slab and Pokeball together, it's somewhat of a similar situation to Pokeball and research. If you have 3 basics and 4 non-basics in your deck, you gotta ask yourself what you need. If what you need is a basic, then use slab first, and if it gives you a basic, then it gives your Pokeball a better chance of giving you the basic you need. If you need a non-basic, then you Pokeball first to make the slab less likely to hit a basic. And then if the slab doesn't hit, you will still be more likely to draw into that non-basic before you will draw into a basic as the game goes on. So if you want a basic, slab first. If you don't want a basic, then ball first. The most complicated combination is when you have research, Pokeball, and slab all together. For the most part, we can combine the logic of all the pairings. Slab is always better before research. Ball is usually better before research. And ball and slab switch between what is better to go first depending on what you need. When you have all 3, first consider your slab and ball. The slab has to be first or second to be used because it may get much worse if you leave it to the end. Pokeball is better to use first. You will use your slab, which will then make your research better. If slab is better to use first, then you can consider if it's better to research or ball first depending on what you need. I'll show the different flow charts on the screen here. You need a specific card, Pokeball first to thin the deck, then slab to strengthen the research, then use the research third. If you need a specific basic, use slab first. If you get what you need, then use Pokeball to thin the deck to strengthen research, then use research. If you need a specific basic and use slab first, but you don't get what you need, then use research to help you find it, then use Pokeball at the end. Truthfully, there is almost no guarantee when it comes to the consistency cards available in Poké right now. You can at least sequence your cards to give you the best chances of success, and I recommend rewatching this part, writing the different sequences down, or memorizing the different sequences and the times to use each sequence. Every deck in Pokemon Pocket has to consider how their deck's math matches up to the other decks it will be facing. Not only do you have to look at the damage you're doing to other Pokemon, you also have to look at your own Pokemon's HP to consider what it will take for the opponent to take it out. Let's start defensively. Mewtwo has 150 HP, which means that most things can't take him out in one hit. There are some who can. Charizard EX hits for 200 and that will always knock it out. Blastoise EX can hit for 160, which will always knock it out. Zapdos EX can hit for 0, 50, 100, 150, or 200, meaning that it has a 40% chance of knocking out Mewtwo in one go. If Mewtwo has 3 energy on it, Alakazam can hit it for 150 damage and knock it out. You can always have your Mewtwo stay at 2 energy on the opponent's turn by side driving when you get to 4 energy and not overloading higher than 4 on 1 Mewtwo. That way you can survive Alakazam. And if you're still in the process of building up your Mewtwo and you have a Gardevoir, then you don't actually need to put a 3rd energy onto your Mewtwo. You could just wait until the next turn. You can have your Gardevoir put 1 on and the normal energy per turn as well. Genetic Apex Golem can do 150 damage flat to knock you out. Marowak EX can do 0, 80, or 160 damage with its coin flips, so it does have a 25% chance of knocking out our Mewtwo in one hit. UEX can copy your active Pokemon's move, so it can use Side Drive to take out your Mewtwo. Celebi can honestly do any amount of damage. Its potential damage output scales with the amount of energy that it can charge up with. It does 50 damage for each heads it lands, so it only needs 3 heads to take out a Mewtwo. For all these Pokemon that can take out your Mewtwo, you have to be careful. If your Mewtwo is in the active spot, they might be able to switch into one of these to take it out. There are some ways you can go about stopping these threats though. Firstly, you can build up your Mewtwo EX on the bench while keeping something else in the active spot. The Pokemon in your active spot could be drawing cards for you, it could be tanking damage, it could be dishing out damage itself to make the opponent more likely to switch into the big hitter, and that's really the main point. You want to play a game of chicken with your opponent to see who brings that big threat to the front first. That way, even if they kill what's in your active spot, you can follow up on the next turn bringing the Mewtwo out to take that threat out. And that first Pokemon that they knocked out will have been a worthy sacrifice to give you the advantage. You can also bypass the chicken game by playing Sabrina, letting them choose one of their bench Pokemon to put in the active spot. If they chose their hard hitter, you can retreat into Mewtwo and hit it before it hits you. If they choose something else, then you may still get a meaningful point advantage by hitting that Pokemon. If you have to stay in a chicken game though, for a Mewtwo deck, you will try to win the chicken game by setting up 2 hard hitters. One to get points first and get knocked out, and the second to take out the Pokemon that took out your first and then clean up the rest of the game. It's a lot easier for a hard hitter like Mewtwo to deal with the rest of the Pokemon that have to kill in 2 shots. If they get the first swing, Mewtwo still lives and they can take it out, so that it can't get a second attack off. This gets a bit more complicated though when the Pokemon that can KO us in 2 hits has more HP than Mewtwo. If they hit Mewtwo first, then Mewtwo hits back and is unable to KO them, then they can get their second attack off and take out our win condition. For this reason, these kinds of Pokemon, Machamp EX, Gengar EX, Mythical Island Golem, Venusaur EX, and Pidgeot EX, you still want to play the chicken game with them to try to make the opponent bring them out to the active spot before you bring out Mewtwo, so your Mewtwo can be the first to hit them. It can get a lot more complicated for Mewtwo if the opponent can set up either Blastoise EX with 5 water energy or Gyarados EX. Blastoise doing 160 damage means that Mewtwo EX is never going to survive its attack, even if you use a blue to reduce the damage, and having 180 HP means that it'll always survive a side drive even with Giovanni. You can't try to 2-shot it because it'll KO you before you get the chance. It's the same deal with Gyarados EX. It also has 180 HP, meaning that you will never 1-shot it, but it only does 140 damage, so Mewtwo should be able to survive 1 hit from it unless a Giovanni is involved. And even with a Giovanni, could use blue preemptively to prevent that. But the way the Gyarados deck is set up, with the Greninjas and Druddigons, they're gonna get that Mewtwo into 1-shot range one way or another. If they have Druddigon, you choose not to attack it, then they will be given more time to power up their Gyarados and set up their Greninja. The Shuriken can lower Mewtwo to 130 HP when Gyarados is ready to attack. And even with you using a blue, the 140 damage from Gyarados will still knock you out. But if you do attack the Druddigon, it's going to deal 20 damage to you, powering you to 130 and putting you in the exact same predicament. When it comes to these matchups, there's no way that Mewtwo can beat these threats, so the only thing you can do is to hurt their win conditions before they can set up. When you get enough energy on Mewtwo, you could use Sabrina to attack them before they evolve, keep them from putting you in lethal range. You'd also Sabrina them if they're already evolved but don't have enough energy to attack for the win on their following turn, so that you can successfully 2-hit KO them. In the Blastoise matchup, they can 2-hit KO with only 3 energy. You could take advantage of that by using Sabrina to force them out for the Mewtwo to get the first hit in, take 100 damage, then finish them off with Side Drive. In the Gyarados matchup, when you Sabrina, will send out Gyarados or Greninja. If it's Greninja, then taking it out will prevent them from undoing your potions, allow you to stay healthy by not attacking Druddigon. Taking Gyarados before Mewtwo has any damage on it forces the opponent into having a Giovanni to finish the job in their follow-up turn. Actually be safer when you're playing a game of chicken to actually put pressure on the opponents with Jinx or Gardevoir. That way you can do damage to them with Sabrina in a way that will only net them 1 prize when the Jinx or Gardevoir go down. Their Pokemon will be softened for the side drive. Math involved for any given matchup for Mewtwo is only really solvable if you have things going your way. If you are in a favorable matchup, it means you can easily sweep the opponent's team with Mewtwo, or you have plenty of opportunity to play around the opponent's game plan by utilizing the chicken game. There are gonna be some matchups though that the opponent's game plan is gonna put you in a corner, exposing your game plan's weaknesses and giving you very little opportunity for counterplay. This isn't to say that these matchups are always gonna result in a loss. It means that in these matchups, you've got to draw everything you need at the perfect time. First obvious weakness for Mewtwo is a weakness it always has, the Dark type. No matter that deeply what Dark type game plan the opponent is setting up, Arbok, Scolipede, Golbat, it all does super effective damage to your Psychics. It can all attack pretty cheaply, meaning they can wipe you out before you have a chance to set up. Honestly, you're really going to need them to draw poorly for you to win this one, and you can wall up a little with Mewtwo in the back to potentially have Mewtwo come in and sweep with more HP, but with your other Pokemon being Psychic type 2, they're probably taking those down a bit too easily for that to matter. I only bring up this weakness of the deck because it is the biggest weakness of all, so you have to know about it. The good thing is though, that while this deck has no trouble stomping a Mewtwo deck, it has to fight an uphill battle against other decks. This can dissuade people from playing this deck, so you can be a little bit more confident taking this deck online. Be careful if Mewtwo happens to be the best deck in the game during the format though, because then with people expecting it, they might be willing to take the losses to those other decks in order to counter this one for the overall higher win rate. Another important weakness for this deck is Druddigon. Druddigon isn't going to do any massive damage to Mewtwo, but with it being in the opponent's active spot, it threatens to soften up your Mewtwo to make it easier for an opponent to take it out. If you attack it with Psychic Sphere, it will survive, and you'll take 20 damage, bringing you down to 130. If you attack it again on the next turn, you'll take an additional 20 damage, bringing you down to 110, which is in a range that a lot more Pokemon can attack in for. For this reason, you should Sabrina the Drotagon into the bench or avoid attacking so that you can minimize the damage, because you'll take it out with one side drive anyway. Even so, 130 is a relevant threshold against Gyarados and against Mythical Island Golem when accounting for Giovanni. Both of these Pokemon can't be one-shot by a Mewtwo if you had another charged up already on the bench, so Drotagon setting up a kill for them is an incredibly deadly setup. There's still a little bit of counterplay you can do to help against these matchups though. If you can use Sabrina to have them bring something out to the front, you can retreat into Jinx, use your turn energy and Gardevoir energy to power up, and she'll do 30 damage plus an additional 20 for each energy in the opponent's Pokemon. Both of these matchups want to play a bit of a chicken game with us, with Drotagon giving them the best front wall threat to make us act first. With Jinx, we can safely act first by doing up to 110 damage against these beasts, but even if they retaliate, they are at risk of being taken out by a side drive, removing their win condition that they've been building up the whole game. You don't have to stress so hard anymore, and you can take your time getting your remaining points from the rest of their team. Just remember, don't attack Drotagon if you know it's going to lead to a potential win for them. Aggressive decks that can get quick damage going in the early turns of the game can be rough for Mewtwo to survive, because even with our fastest starts, we require time to set up. And if they can get early points before we can do that, then it will be much harder for us to play a good game against them. In these matchups, you need to buy as much time as you can. In these matchups, you really want to be able to get 2 Mewtwo's going so that you can have them soak up some damage and then have them retreat with X-Speeds or Leafs. So the other Mewtwo can take some damage, just preventing the opponent from getting early points as much as possible. You can take your time setting up your Mewtwo to sweep. The good thing is that if you can successfully do this, those faster decks do struggle a bit in the longer game. So your Mewtwo's, despite being lower on HP, can often clean up. Just keep in mind that when you go for this game plan, to keep track of which of your Mewtwo's is going to be able to side drive for you first. Prioritize attaching energy to them. Sacrifice the other one if you need to, but do try to avoid it. Celebi EX is a very similar deck to this one. They can also attack for 2 energy for an average of 50 damage, and they can also ramp up their energy with a stage 2, allowing them to sweep teams by itself. There's really nothing in the game that consistently do as much damage as a Celebi EX, but really extra damage above 200 kinda redundant in this game. For a Mewtwo deck, watch out for when it has 6 energy or when it has 3 energy with a superior, because flipping 6 coins, they're going to do an average of 150 damage. Of course, they'll only need 3 energy for that potential, but it will be a rarer occurrence. Real threat of this card is that it can easily buy time by having Executor EX in the front line with its 160 HP, either 40 or 80 damage every turn for only 1 energy. Such a fast attacker is a weakness for Mewtwo, since if Mewtwo can't set up in time, it's only a matter of time before the egg will either take it out by itself or weaken it enough for the Celebi to finish it off. Since the egg only requires 1 energy to attack, they can take advantage of you taking your time to build up your own strategy to start charging up their Celebi for a big attack. 160 HP on the egg is such a relevant number because it means that a Scythe Drive can't take it down without a Giovanni. If you try to bring it down to size with a Psychic Sphere, they can use Erica to heal it right back up to full health, meaning you're still going to need that Giovanni to one-shot it. Killing the egg is such a big priority here because the egg buys them all the time they need against our game plan, and by killing it with a Mewtwo, they can switch into a charged up Celebi to finish off the Mewtwo we spent all that time building up. Realistically, most games against Celebi are going to play out like that, so trying to fight the nature of the matchup is only going to make things more difficult for us. Once they do kill our Mewtwo, they are certain to do, we can bring forward our Jinx and charge it up in just 1 turn with the turn energy and the Gardevoir energy. The Celebi will have so much energy on it, Jinx will almost certainly one-shot that Celebi, get the rest of our points for us. One thing I personally have found to be really helpful when trying to beat Mewtwo decks, playing 1 or 2 copies of Mew EX in my deck. Needing 3 colorless energy, I can really put it in any deck I want, and the fact that it can copy Side Drive 1 turn before the Mewtwo can even use Side Drive means that in the active spot, Mew EX will always have the faster kill. Despite that, the opponent may well see it coming, and it'll become a chicken game. If you send out your Mew first while they have Mewtwo ready to attack, then their Mewtwo will certainly be able to take it down. If they do send up their Mewtwo though, regardless of if it can attack or not, the Mew can come up and take it down. Whoever puts the guy in the active first loses then, essentially, unless the opponent's Mewtwo won't have enough energy to fight back the next turn. You have to think ahead. When the opponent's Mewtwo has 2 energy on it, and they have a Gardevoir or a Curlier that can evolve into one, it means that you have to consider that they can probably use Side Drive next turn. I'm talking from the perspective of the Mew EX player here, because you as the Mewtwo EX player here have to understand the thought process of the opponent's chicken game. Once they start thinking about it, you have to start thinking about it too, because if you don't, they will certainly win. Too many Mewtwo players see my Mew X on the bench with 2 energy, but send out their Mewtwo to KO my active Pokemon anyway. It's for my Mew EX to come out, get its 3rd energy, and side drive them back to Fortnite. You can't make that mistake. Play the chicken game against them and keep your Mewtwo in the back waiting for the revenge kill. Revenge kill, by the way, is a Pokemon term referring to having your own Pokemon take a knockout so that you can instantly switch in to the right Pokemon to take out whatever took it out. Throughout this video, I've talked about all of the benefits that X-Speed, Leaf, Sabrina, Giovanni, and Blue can give. I do feel that if I am going to guide you guys on the right plays to make in this deck in particular, I should also give you some general advice for using these cards. Since they are generic, they'll often have uses that are useful on a broader scale rather than just matchup to matchup. Sometimes you're going to start the game with the only basic Pokemon in your hand being Routes or Jinx. Either of these Pokemon are going to go down in one hit on the first turn. There are some things that can take him down on the second turn. It's actually alright to just let them take a hit on the first turn cycle unless the opponent gets lucky with a Kangaskhan or is playing a dark deck. These Pokemon aren't meant to be your frontliners. They are there to sit on the bench looking pretty, be there for when your Mewtwo needs support. When you send up your Jinx to take out a big Celebi or do big damage to Gyarados or Golem, opponent's gonna be able to take her out at full HP anyway, so it's kinda redundant to worry about her health as long as she's healthy enough to be alive. We are pretty much never planning on having Gardevoir in the active spot on the vast majority of games. Her HP isn't too much to focus on either as long as she's alive. The reason I mention this is that if you're going first with one of these as your only basics but you're able to get a Mewtwo after, you may want to use your X-Speed or Leaf to get them out of the active spot to bring Mewtwo to the front. If you leave them there for a turn, maybe they take a little bit of damage, but it's okay because you will X-Speed them back to the bench next turn to have Mewtwo take the lead and put energy on him. If you do use the X-Speed on your first turn, the opponent might take advantage of the fact that you've already used your X-Speed to use a Sabrina on you, which will cause you to need another trainer to help you retreat, or will force you to waste an energy attachment on your Routes or Jinx to retreat them a second time. Leaf is such an important card in this deck because it helps you pivot your Mewtwo back into the bench to set up to play a chicken game, or to let you send out a Jinx cheaply to start doing wild damage on hugely set up Pokemon. The only thing that is rough about the Leaf is that it is a supporter card, meaning that you can't use a Giovanni, Sabrina, or Blue on the same turn, which are often important for your Mewtwo to do enough damage, survive enough damage, or cripple the opponent the way that you really want. For this reason, X-Speed being an item card gives us that extra versatility of getting a cheap or free retreat, while still letting us take advantage of the powerful supporter cards. Sabrina is probably the most powerful effect on a supporter because it messes with the setup dynamic that the bench is supposed to be a safe zone. Of course, players can play around their most important Pokemon getting brought forward as a Sabrina by having other Pokemon on their bench to sacrifice to the Sabrina. Even with that being the case, Sabrina can often allow you to earn a much needed prize point on the opponent. Just getting one prize point can make a huge difference against EX decks because when you have one prize point, they are at risk of losing the game anytime they end their turn with a vulnerable EX in the active spot. But if they do bring forth their EX, then you can get the first hit on it, or even better, if it's in lethal range, you can get the final hit on it. With this effect though, you gotta use it carefully, because the opponent might see what you're planning to do with it and choose a Pokemon that lessens the impact of the card. You can limit the amount of knowledge they have by activating Sabrina at the start of your turn before attaching any energy, before retreating any Pokemon, before playing any Pokemon from your hand, and before using any other trainers. You could use Sabrina with them not knowing that you have 2 X-Speed in your hand, and they might bank on the idea that you're only doing it to stall them for energy. They send up the Pokemon you want to hit because they don't know that you can KO it. Then you can use your X-Speeds, play Jinx from your hand for example, retreat your low or no energy Mewtwo into the Jinx, ramp Jinx up with Gardevoir, and do an insane amount of damage to that Pokemon that they didn't see coming. Even if they see it coming, they have to consider multiple avenues when choosing which Pokemon to send forward with Sabrina. The more information you give them for free, easier it is for them to see which avenue you'll choose. More importantly, Pokemon they choose may influence the avenue to decide to go for. So Sabrina being the first card you use on your turn is always the best way to use her, if you are going to use her. It's also important to know when not to to use Sabrina at all. You need to look at the opponent's board state and see if your cards can take advantage of the situation that Sabrina will create. And if there's a chance at all that it will be meaningless, you just shouldn't use it and save it for a better opportunity. Giovanni and Blue are kind of like two sides of the same coin. All they do is modify damage by 10 points, but both of these are far more impactful than you might think on first seeing them. You might remember that Executor EX having 160 HP means that it will always survive a side drive at full health, unless you have a Giovanni, and taking it to lower HP a turn earlier with a Psychic Sphere can be undone by Erica, bringing him back up to full. It's just way too much tanking going on, and even though the egg is the best at it early game, it's not the only Pokemon that Mewtwo needs a Giovanni to take out. You would be surprised just how many basic Pokemon have exactly 60 HP, just slightly out of range of your Psychic Sphere attack. And if you could just get that one early knockout, you could give yourself a huge advantage by only needing to knock out one EX Pokemon to win the game. Giovanni is also really helpful in the context of the other supporter Blue, which will reduce 10 damage. The fact that Side Drive does 150 is pretty relevant to taking out opposing Mewtwo's, Arcanines that haven't attacked yet, and Melmetals, all which need exactly 50 damage to be knocked out. If those players use a Blue, suddenly they're going to survive a hit from Mewtwo, and that can really mess with the plan you had of one-shotting them, especially if your Mewtwo is low enough on health for it to matter. Using Giovanni negates the Blue and brings the damage back to normal so you can get those knockouts right when you need them. On the other end of the spectrum, there are other Pokemon that can hit your Mewtwo for 150, opposing Mewtwo's, Mew EX's, Alakazam's, Genetic Apex Golems, LBX's, Scolipeds, and using a Blue will give your Mewtwo another turn to attack, and that can make the difference so many times in a game. It goes even further than that too. If the opponent has a Pokemon that does 140 damage, Gyarados EX, Pidgeot EX, using a Giovanni puts them in lethal range, but preemptively using a Blue can prevent that play and buy you another turn. It's not just useful in these one-shot scenarios either. If your Mewtwo has taken some damage over the course of the game and you want it to stay alive in the active spot and your opponent's next hit could kill it with the exact damage, or would need Giovanni to get the exact amount of damage, or need Greninja to get the right amount of damage, you can give yourself another turn to attack by using Blue. Now you know when Blue and Giovanni are useful. Just don't use them when it wouldn't make sense to use them. Just use them at the perfect time that it guarantees your survival or guarantees you a knockout that turn. Last card I'll talk about is Potion. It's a similar situation to Blue, the way that it lets your Pokemon survive more hits, but only being applicable when already taken damage doesn't help you against the Pokemon one-shotting you, whereas Blue can. Double Potion is definitely a play you should keep in mind when you're doing damage to opponent's Pokemon though. For Mewtwo, that's usually not an issue since Mewtwo can one-shot most of the game regardless. The way that this deck is built, this format, is mostly solved as far as the Pokemon is concerned. 2 Mewtwo EXs, 2 Gardevoir lines, and a Jinx is the way that's currently working best. People were experimenting with 1 Mew EX for a long time, but it's kind of redundant because all it does is the same role as Mewtwo EX but a bit faster. And when you're playing Chicken, that little bit of extra speed isn't as important, especially with how Mewtwo X with a Blue can help you solve the Chicken game by surviving more often. But that play just isn't there for Mew EX. It's also important that Mew EX doesn't solve the problems that this deck needs to be solved. We need a single prize Pokemon to soak up an attack and hope to set up for a Mewtwo revenge kill. We need a way to reliably KO Celebi, which only Jinx can do. Especially only needing 2 energy makes it amazing because you can play it from your hand and attack with it the same turn with the help of Retreating Support and Gardevoir, another play you can't do with Mew EX. When looking at the trainer cards, every deck is already going to play 2 Ball and 2 Search, and since this is a Psychic deck, people go to play 1 or 2 Slabs. Every slot after that is where your personal preferences are going to come in. X-Speeds and Leafs at some level are needed, Sabrinas and Giovannis at some level are needed. How many of each are you going to play? And how many slots will you leave open for Blue if you even play it? My thought process when it comes to trainer cards is that there are 2 reasons to choose a certain amount of them. If you play 2 copies, it's because you either want to see a copy as soon as possible in the game, or because you plan on using the card twice. If you play 1 copy, it's because you need to have the effect somewhere in the deck, but it's not imperative to get it early in the game, or because you only plan on using it once. Use these thought processes when you decide how many of each trainer you play, and if you play an open deck list, best of 3 tournament, you can throw in a red card in there from mind games if you like, but don't play that card under any other circumstances. I know a lot of people are gonna hate me for trying to give Mewtwo players more insight, but I feel like if you're gonna play a strategy game, It's more rewarding to beat someone that's played well rather than somebody that didn't. And honestly, this community has proven that no matter what problem the format faces, the players will always adapt and find new ways to counter it. That's what makes this game so amazing, the constant evolution of the player base. And that being said, this video is not the end all and be all from Mewtwo EX knowledge. I'm sure that there will be people out there who could let us know in the comments some of their own insights about the deck, and I know that as the Mystical Island format progresses, this archetype will get more and more context for us to adapt to, and I welcome it all. I'm excited to see it. If you guys like this type of video and want me to do more, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what other archetypes I should do videos on in the future. Other than that, guys, thanks for watching. Have yourselves a good one. I've been Undead from Team 6K, signing out.